right, starting here on Blackrook Hold. Just kind of trying to make a quick video to go over some general kind of tips, tricks throughout Blackrook Hold. Some of which will be generally applicable and some of which will be a little bit more specific to Warlock. There is a protector right here in this very, very first pack. And so typically in groups, you will see this pack and this pack pulled together. There are 3 counselors and 1 protector in this grouped pull here. The reason that's worth noting is because counselors are the ones that do the soul bolt cast. That's what people will typically focus exclusively, because it will one-shot people. It does a lot of damage, especially on fortified, especially on bolstering. So this is what people will typically focus, are these counselors. And that is typically correct to do, outside of when the protector is casting sacrifice souls. When he is casting sacrifice souls, you 100% need to swap to the protector. And this is regardless of whatever class you are. If you are a DPS, ideally even your tank should swap to this target when he's casting sacrifice souls. What that ability does is it makes everyone else in the pack take 75% reduced damage. So all of your damaged counselors basically means nothing. Retainers means nothing. It's massively reduced. Not 99%, but still 75% is a good chunk of your damage, right? And it makes him take 75% increased damage. So you can really pump out some big numbers just by full single targeting the protector during that time. You're going to do more damage pumping single target into the protector on average than you will hitting the counselors. Of course, unless you're a class that like gains damage by hitting other targets, I would switch to full single target when he casts sacrifice souls and getting, for destruction, some chaos bolts out there for, demonology, making sure that, of course, you're sending your hand of Goldans and your dogs specifically on him. Make sure that you are swapping targets, because the way, of course, imps work for demonology is they only attack the target that Hand of Gul'dan was cast on until that target dies. So definitely worth it to make sure that you are putting your spells into him, even if you're, like I said, demonology, worth it to make sure that your imps are going to be hitting him. Otherwise, another good just piece of advice in general, not really so much across this dungeon, but for specifically the portion that has these counselors in it, Curse of Tongues, amazing. Always worth it to put this up. There's 3 globals in this pull. Totally worth it. It's at almost certainly at least going to save 1 person's life in this pull. If you typically have 2 deaths on this pull, you'll have 1 or 0. If you put Curse of Tongues up, almost guaranteed. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull through here. This is mostly just me kind of running through here. There's also a protector in this pull, so worthwhile to note. Same principle applies here. This Lady Ravencrest that just died, unfortunately on this stop point here, does cast a frontal. Of course, as a range, we're not typically worried about that. Sometimes your tank does some weird stuff though. Sometimes they do like pull them up the stairs and you maybe are ahead of them, or maybe they have to move for entangling and that frontal just unfortunately gets pointed at you or possibly at somebody else that you might be in voice comms with. Especially melee are really vulnerable to this, especially demon hunters, of course, because they do unfortunately have to move quite a bit in order to get their damage out. It's called strike down. So always worth it to make sure that you are avoiding that. Not just you personally, but ensuring that all your melee are aware and just kind of watching out for it. This is a gate that you can do. It's really straightforward. It's especially worth it if you have Soul Burn, which I am using right here. Gives you the instigate. Really gives your tank a lot of mobility. In this dungeon, I mostly use Warlock Gate just for these kind of straight line gates that are like, at the end of the day, they might only save 2 or 3 seconds, but 2 or 3 seconds across an entire dungeon 4, 5, 6 times is definitely enough to, potentially go from a +1 key to a +2 key. I honestly think that there is absolutely nothing on this boss that Warlock really needs to be concerned about. Of course, just general strategy for this boss is kill ads when they come up. Always worth it if you have like a druid or anyone para with monks, anyone that has a long duration CC, Frost Trap from hunters, anything that is a long duration CC, you can have one of the ads that spawn, just have them throw that CC on one of them, kill the rest of them. The boss will stay in that state where he is kind of pulling the ads towards him until he reaches 10% HP, or all the ads die, or all of the ads reach him. So if you leave one of those ads alive the whole time, he will not gain the buff when he reaches 10% HP, and he will basically just stand there and let you hit him until he is at 10% HP. Super, super valuable. Basically, you have 40% of the boss's HP bar where he's doing nothing. So super useful there. Saves you a lot of uptime, especially for your casters. So I'm just going to go ahead and skip through here. This is a gate that is actually kind of difficult just because of the angle, just camera being bad here. But again, another gate that is just save your tank time. Save your tank time. I think that is a huge underrated benefit of Warlock is they save the tank time just running around. So this is another gate you can use. I think that is better send it over the table here because I've not even just tanks, tons of people just get caught on this table on this like weird terrain shit here. So if you're not concerned about that, you can also just throw it up the stairs from the boss room. Nothing super interesting here. Worthwhile to note that what they inflict on you is just on your tank, whoever is tanking them, is actually just a magic debuff. But especially on fortified weeks, your tank pulling all of these up, which is a very, very typical way to pull this. Warlocks can actually cleanse magic with Imp. Singed magic from Imp will cleanse your tank. You do have to summon it, ensure Imp is summoned, and target your tank, and then use Command Demon, and it will cleanse the magic debuff off of them. So that can be a huge boon, especially if this for some reason is going long. Maybe they pulled it weird, maybe one of your DPS died early, and the little spiders are just taking slightly too long. Warlock, as far as I'm aware, I unfortunately don't play every spec in the game. Outside of Mass Dispel, Warlock is the only DPS spec that I'm aware of that can cleanse magic effects. Now we do have to kind of jump through hoops to do it, but we can do it. There's a lot of value in us doing it, especially in this moment here. So, moving on, kind of briefly here, did want to speak on that mob right there. So, Arcanist there that just died is very similar to Counselors. Those Arcane Blasts will kill you. Very, very easy for those to one-shot, especially bolstered, especially fortified, of course. Speaking as we are in the fortified bolster week right now that I am making this video, they will very easily one-shot you. Sometimes even through a defensive, depending on how strong your defensive is. So very important that those need to be interrupted. Don't get, maybe let one or two casts go off if the person has a defensive up, but really any more than that, you're probably in a really tough spot. And once one DPS dies on a pull, of course, you're limited in your kicks, it becomes much more difficult to keep up with them. So Curse of Tongues, valuable there, especially because honestly, the Arcane Blast cast there is a little short compared to a lot of other casts that do need to be interrupted. So would recommend Curse of Tongues on that mob especially. So kind of moving on here, nothing super fancy. Worthwhile to note, those archers do just cast Shoot, which is just shooting their bow at somebody, and the Barrage, where they kind of jump away and do the frontal cone. The frontal cone can be dodged, the Shoot can't. So a lot of people will stun the Barrage. Understand that, of course, if your group wants to do that, I'm not sure how many people do run those organized groups that kind of make that decision prior. But again, Shoot is targeted, does a decent amount of damage. If there's nothing else to knock in the pull, it's probably better to knock Shoot than it is to knock the Barrage. But moving on here, so did want to speak on the Scout mob. Single-handedly responsible for your wipes in these rooms. Almost single-handedly every time. Or at least in my case. In my experience, this mob is the problem. It will cast an ability called Knife Dance that can be LOS'd, or it can be knocked. Cannot be interrupted. a good general rule is that these first ones, just knock them. That's the general game plan. Can be knocked, of course, with all of the general Warlock, and honestly any class knocks. They are vulnerable to all of them. Fear, Horrify, Disorients, Stuns, everything. Everything will hit these. So from a Warlock perspective, of course, from Destruction, we have Infernal, Shadow Fury, Blasphemies, Coil, and Fear. So those are kind of our knocks that are available to us. And then, of course, Demonology in place of Infernal and Blasphemies as Grimoire Felguard, technically. And this is the one that many people forget, myself included at times. The normal Command Demon, which is effectively our Interrupt as Warlock, for Felguard is a stun. It is both a kick and a stun. So important here, if you do just need a single target stun on one of these scouts, you can just interrupt it. You can just use your normal interrupt button and it will stun it, as long as it does not stun DR'd. DR being diminishing returns. So as long as that is all you need, just a normal kick from a Demonology Warlock will actually work, because it will also stun the target. But otherwise, if you're really out of options, Knife Dance is going off, LOS is not a reasonable option, just hard casting Fear. That is something that we can almost spam. There is a Fear DR. Unless you have two warriors in your group that both use Intimidating Shout, you're not going to hit it unless you just spam cast Fear. So using this, actually valuable for ending those Knife Dance casts. And you can see the cooldown of Knife Dance. There's a weak aura that does show enemy abilities and their cooldowns on the nameplate. I don't believe you'll actually see it here, unfortunately, when I pull these, but there is a weak aura that you can get that will add that. So that's super valuable. You'll actually see it here. This is showing the frontal on the champion. I don't think we get to see the scout, but it will also track. It does show that, which is very important to know if you want to like hard cast a Fear. Actually, you can see it right here perfectly. If you want to hard cast a Fear, you do want to start the cast before that comes off cooldown, or maybe right as it comes off cooldown, because they will cast it right as it's available to them. So worthwhile to just start your cast a little early, get the Fear out, interrupt the Knife Dance. Nobody else has to worry about it. Super good. Another quick gate that I always do here is just that one. A little diagonal there. Save your tank time. Save yourself time. Especially in groups, and I even see this above 20 keys, unfortunately, that don't want to do the staircase themselves. They're just nervous about hitting rocks. Rather than do that than die on repeat to rocks. So if you are confident in your ability to get through those rocks, then this gate is super useful. Just get you there before potentially other people that may or may not take your gate, and get yourself right up the stairs. Of course, this first staircase, if you make it quick like I did right here, you only get a handful of rocks anyway. I think you can actually get as low as like 2 rocks. So I did not actually end up taking this gate because I have a 40-second cooldown on my gate. I didn't really want to wait that long. But you can actually send a gate far enough up these stairs that you can skip this Dominator. But you can also just use it as save your tank time. Send your tank up here. They throw something backwards to pull this Dominator into the next one. Or maybe they even pull all 3 Dominators up the stairs. Maybe they even pull all 4 Dominators. This saves a lot of time of them potentially getting punched in the head or in the back. That would potentially kill them. So definitely want to save your tank time there. These are also vulnerable to Curse of Tongues. Cast can typically be interrupted because you only have like a couple of mobs of these at a time, typically only 2 of them at a time for most groups. But they can be Curse of Tongues, and especially if you accidentally pull 3 or accidentally pull, I say accidentally pull 4, you're gonna have to intentionally pull 4. But accidentally pull 3, or if you're just concerned about interrupts, Curse of Tongues does help with that. So Going into here, I think I just one-shot this boss, if I'm not mistaken. I just kind of quickly kill it and turn around. Basically nothing on that fight. Basic idea of that fight, the charges will target somebody, puts a debuff on whoever does get hit by that, can be blocked by another player. Warlocks are great for tanking those. We have a shield wall. Huge boon. We do have a Dark Pact, which is also a gigantic shield. Typically, your melee are going to be taking those anyway, but in the event that we have to, a Dark Pact is always enough. If we don't have Dark Pact, Resolve is always enough, as long as we have no debuff. Second part of that fight is, this is kind of a worthwhile note, you will get targeted by Fell Vomits, which do put a line on you from a bat that is typically just completely off screen, way off in fucking Neverland. Wherever that bat is coming from will get filled with the vomit all the way across based on that line. So you can save yourself a lot of space in this room just by aiming those like against walls or just kind of away from the boss. Again, this is just another save your tank time. Kind of gates them past those two. And as long as no melee touches them, they'll just walk in at the tank. Or your tank can just throw something backwards at them, like a Avenger Shield or whatever they have. And then show, this is actually a safe spot. This is not super useful for some classes because your pets will get stuck up here. Any guardians you spawn up here will get stuck up here. So pretty rough for Beast Mastery Hunters or for Demo Locks. But this position and the opposite position here on this wall, I actually think I hop down and show off the opposite position. These are safe spots where the Raven's Dive will not hit and stun you, because you are technically off the ground. They will still target you and put the brown swirly under you, but they shouldn't actually hit you. Because you're technically off the ground, again, your guardians will not hop down, so pretty bad for Demo. And if you are going to do this as Destro, you have to, and you're going to cast Infernal on the pole, you have to make sure that you are down off the wall when you cast Infernal. Just a worthwhile note there. Not really a ton to speak about on this fight either. In this first phase, which unfortunately just immediately ends, he does cast Throw Glaive on a random party member. That needs to be aimed at the shortest distance that is reasonable between him, Mr. Ravencrest here, and whatever wall. So if he's exactly where he is right now, this would be the shortest distance between him and a wall. So if you're the target of that glaive, you would stand right about here. That would give you enough time to dodge the glaive after it comes out, and would be the shortest distance to a wall. Basically, the way that glaive works, first off, you'd never want it to go right through the middle. So like right here would be basically the worst place you could stand, because your melee are just going to get hit by it, probably even if they're a fairly decent player. Unfortunate consequence of being melee. Have to hit the boss. So it gets really awkward, gets really, unfortunately, not super hectic, but is more than you really need going on there. So, but it has a limited number of bounces. So the shorter you can get that line, the faster it goes away. So big benefit there. Very easy to get that duration very low. Nothing really else on this fight. There are kind of some neat things that you might be able to share if you have like a paladin friend or something like that. Paladins can, this boss, that is unfortunately laying here dead on the ground, does put a bleed on whoever's tanking him that can be either bubbled or bopped off. So if you have a Ret friend or a Holy Paladin friend, and they're willing to take bop for this dungeon, which they probably should, especially on Tyrannical, they can just, during this phase, when they're doing their little RP, just bop the tank clicks off bop, or if they do it right at the start, there's actually enough RP here that bop will just naturally fall off before the next boss becomes active, but they'll probably just click off bop. Blessing of Protection, that removes the bleed, can make the healing so much more reasonable. Otherwise, on Tyrannical weeks, your tank may have to rotate defensives coming in here, which will leave them a little bare for the very first Shadow Volley here, which the Shadow Bolt Volley, I think I actually let it cast here. This is the main concern though. Whenever I do this fight, This cast right here, very specifically, the very first Shadow Bolt volley, is the scary thing in the fight. You will see people get one shot by this. You will see people die almost immediately after this. It is because you don't have the buff yet. This guy gives you a buff for this fight. It gives you like 100%, 200% increased health and damage, something like that, something to that effect. It's a gigantic buff. Basically makes the Shadow Bolt volleys negligible damage. But before you get that buff, it's huge damage. So, quite honestly, the way I typically deal with this is I would unending resolve this on a real key, maybe Dark Pact if I'm feeling pretty good about my healer. Either way, we live this. As long as you have your soul leech up, you live this. But extra living it means extra heals for the rest of your group. So just personal defense of this, you can double defensive it. The consequence of double defensing it, and I'm not against double defensive, using double defensives here. The downside is when you get a swarm, you don't have anything. And swarms also hurt. Swarms are really hard for Warlock to deal with because we have such long cast times. It's really easy for our cast to get interrupted by them. So you're really relying on the rest of your group to deal with swarms. So I personally try to hold the defensive typically, double defensing here, or even just like saving health stone, saving health pot can really, really help live whatever swarm comes after this. So that's really all the general advice that I would have here for Blackrook Hold. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please absolutely do check out some of the other content available on my channel or catch me live at twitch.tv/Gadalis. Please follow so that you can receive live notifications for when I am streaming. And please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on the video.